Hey everyone, it's Dr. Ramani here at this YouTube channel, and we're taking on another one of these Am I the Assholes, where I weigh in on people who are often bringing interesting kinds of issues in human relationships and thinking that they're the bad ones, so you decide. So here's this person's quandary. This woman asks, am I the asshole for telling my therapist lies because I suspected she was telling my husband what I was telling her during our sessions? Well, that definitely made me sit up straight. This woman says, I started seeing a therapist 6 months ago because I had postpartum depression. It's a very wise thing to do, by the way. At first, she really helped me, but then I noticed on 2 occasions my husband mentioned things I hadn't told him, but I had confided in my therapist. Massive red flag. Since I had no proof, well, I think you had the proof because he knew something she told, but okay, since I had no proof, that's an example of someone gaslighting themselves, but since I had no proof, and I didn't want to accuse either of them, I decided to tell my therapist lies that I knew he would confront me on if he heard them to see if I was being delusional or not. The more I lied to her, the more suspicious I became too, since even things that made my husband look awful were challenged by her and twisted to make him look good. So this is a big triangulated mess. It took a while for him to confront me, but he did. At first, he never believed I was lying during those sessions, but when I finally convinced him I was, he was still furious at me. He said he only wanted to make sure I was okay, and he hadn't been using the therapist to spy on me. Am I the asshole? No, not only you not the asshole, you have actually a real ethics complaint that could be filed. So, for those of you who may not understand how therapy works, a crux, a legal core, frankly, of therapy is confidentiality. You know, all those HIPAA agreements you sign, and most of us don't really read carefully, especially when you go into therapy, read the fine print. Therapy is predicated on confidentiality, right? And I'm not going to even belabor that there are some exceptions to that. For example, if the client is at harm to themselves, or there's known or suspected child abuse, you know, those kinds of exceptions, a person can make a report to an authority. But when it comes down to brass tacks, when you go into therapy, that therapist cannot share anything about you with anyone unless they have your express signed written permission, and only then, only the things you tell them that they can share. So right off the bat, this is beyond just all the toxic dynamics I'll get to in a moment. This woman has a valid complaint. It's really funny because I think I was on an airplane or something, and I just needed something to do, and there were old episodes of Mad Men, and I was watching it, and of course this was the early 1960s, and there was the terrible narcissistic character, Don Draper, and his wife, Betty, was in therapy, and the therapist would just pick up the phone and tell the husband what was going on, right? So different time, you know, but that's a great example of a violation of confidentiality. There is no, well, I'm this person's spouse, I am this person's you do not break confidentiality. Again, it's against the law. It would be a violation of law if I did that. I've even had people call up and say, hey, I am your client, you know, XYZ's husband. I just don't return those calls, you know, because at the end of the day, I cannot confirm or deny somebody is my client. So when people have tried to pull that stunt on me, I just don't return the call. If they do manage to get me, I simply can't confirm or deny. So that's sort of how we have to hold that line. So what it sounds like was happening here is that the husband found the therapist, and that's later on I went through these comments, because when I go down this rabbit hole, I go down this rabbit hole. But when I saw these comments, the woman who wrote the letter, she said how the husband found the therapist for her. Okay, that's how she came to find the therapist initially, but somehow the therapist thought it was appropriate to have a conversation with the husband. That would only have been permissible if the patient signed a piece of paper saying, it's okay for you to share everything that's happening in our sessions with my husband. I can't imagine that this woman signed this piece of paper. So again, therapy doesn't work unless there's trust. And what was fascinating is that she attempted to sort of smoke this out by telling these lies to the therapist. Telling the lies to the therapist, knowing that it would get back to the husband, and knowing that he would come back to her and that would confirm. But it's so interesting to me because it really leaves me wondering how much this woman might have been in a very gaslighted relationship, right? How often, like, literally her reality wasn't even respected, that her husband found a therapist, and goodness knows how, I mean, whether these, she's claiming that the husband and the therapist didn't know each other. In some ways, this makes you wonder, were they friends? Did they have some sort of previous kind of relationship with each other? And I've got to tell you, in my many years of being a therapist, I've had more than a few clients come in and tell me, oh, you know what, I was seeing for someone for therapy. My husband or wife or spouse, whatever, found the therapist for me, and then that therapist was talking to my spouse, to which I said, you have a case. You can call the appropriate board on that, because it is, again, unless you signed away those rights, which I never, by the way, recommend someone ever do. You only sign a release when it's necessary. For example, maybe to get medical care, somebody wants to speak to another healthcare practitioner, and then even then you can say very clearly, these things can be discussed, but these things cannot. And so, just so you have that, awareness. But that this woman, like many people who are chronically gaslighted, that she was still doubting herself and thinking like, well, no, maybe I don't have proof. Well, she has proof. The husband was bringing up stuff that she was only talking to the therapist about, right? So there's your proof, but she was doubting the proof, which to me is very, very much the profile of a survivor of narcissistic abuse or emotional abuse of any kind, or gaslighting, frankly, that I don't have enough proof. I mean, how many of you, when you're gaslighted, feel like you have to pull 1,000 old texts and 1,000 old emails and 1,000 old voicemails to prove your point? Gaslighter ain't going to move. Gaslighters are not based on evidence, right? They're not going to change. They want to hijack reality. It's that simple. So even if you showed them all the text messages in the world, they're not going to say, oh, you're right. They're going to say, you're petty and paranoid. So in this particular case, this woman, feeling she has no proof, had to really go in there and find the proof, which is what so many people do. I have known of people to spend hundreds of dollars setting up cameras in their house to catch a person in the act of what they say they're not doing. And I don't know how much of it is to catch the person or just to feel sane, right? So this person here is telling these lies in therapy to see if they'll get back to her. I said, you know what? I'm thinking it actually saddens me so much how much this woman must have been gaslighted. And then she has to, sort of do this trick to almost show that it is happening. And so then she does it. She feels bad about it. I get it. I actually really get it, because actually the therapist is the 1,000% who was in the wrong here. And this woman was in a terrible situation. And also, just as another point of information, any form of betrayal by a therapist, there's been some good research done on this. The effects on individuals who've been through therapist betrayal, it's on the level of post-trauma. Like, it's such a unique form of betrayal, because it was a carefully curated relationship you went into with absolute trust. And if that trust in any way is abused or violated, the impacts on clients are absolutely terrible. And many times the clients will feel that there's insufficient recourse, feeling that whatever penalties are put on a therapist or healthcare provider by whatever licensing authority there is are often insufficient or a slap on the hand. Therapy only works if there's trust. No trust, no therapy. That's that simple. So as soon as this woman stopped trusting the therapist, that moment was gone. But this woman's husband also betrayed her. So not only does she need to think about dumping the therapist, not so much about even keeping the damn husband. So, and she also says here, there's something really problematic happening in this therapy. She said, the more I lied to the therapist, the more suspicious I became, because even the things that made the husband look bad, so she was telling the therapist these really bad things about the husband she was making up, these things were challenged by the therapist. Why would the therapist know? Why would the therapist be defending the husband? I work with plenty of people who have spouses. I don't know their spouses. My experience is on the experience of the individual in the room was being challenged and twisted to make him look good. So the therapist had some sort of strange skin in the game where the husband was concerned. I mean, even to the level it raises this concern of, like, did they have their own inappropriate relationship, or was he sort of paying this therapist extra to be able to get this information? Like, something super shady was happening here. And so then it took him a while it took a while the husband to confront her, but he did. And then here was what was ironic. He was angry at her for the things she said. Again, she was trying to get his anger up. Then he didn't believe her. I mean, again, as a liar himself, why would he? And then he's claiming, I only want to make sure you're okay. I want to make sure you're okay. And that's an interesting narcissist play, too, right? When they do something that's manipulative or cruel, and then when you call them out on it, and they turn around and said, well, I was just doing that to make sure you're okay. It's a very gaslight maneuver. You are okay. That's reality. So when a person is then saying, I was doing something shady and sinister to make sure you're okay, is the ultimate manipulation. So that's this one. And not only is this woman not the asshole, she's got bigger fish to fry in terms of getting away from that therapist. You know, heaven help her in terms of doing sort of the restorative work on trying to find a therapeutic relationship of her own where she can trust. There are actually therapists who specialize in this area of working with clients who have been betrayed by former therapists and taking a real good hard look in the mirror on, you know, what's happening in this marriage, because the fact is that somehow that information was getting to her husband, and short of her having a recording device in her purse, and if that was the issue, then that's a real problem too, given that the therapist was so vehemently, according to her, defending the husband. It did, and this is again not beyond the pale. I've heard this happening in modern times, not just on Mad Men, where therapists may literally talk to one partner and then about someone in therapy. This kind of an arrangement, this kind of trust violation can happen in small towns where there's not a lot of therapists sometimes, or where there's not a lot of therapists for a very large distance, or in pastoral communities where the counseling might be happening by a pastoral counselor who may not be carefully following the rules and boundaries and confidentiality. Confidentiality is everything, folks. Without it, therapy doesn't work. So, no, sweetie, you are not the asshole, and some really terrible things were done to you. So, once again, most of these folks, they blame themselves, because that's what survivors do, blame themselves. She went in there, she smoked it out, she got the truth, but she was still painted to look like she was the bad actor in all of this. Thanks again.